"Your wife is gone, Tom. I threw out her dusty photo albums. You need to move on." Those 17 words, spoken in my own kitchen by my daughter-in-law, Kristen, 2 years ago, cost her an $800,000 inheritance and any claim to this family's future. And I'm here today to tell you exactly how it happened. My name is Tom Brennan. I'm 78 years old. I live in Cedar Lake, Michigan, in the same Victorian house I bought in 1975. I taught English at Cedar Lake High School for 41 years. I've been a widower for 3 years now, after 47 years of marriage to Catherine. And I need you to understand something right from the start. Those photo albums weren't just pictures. They were the only proof I have left that the woman I loved actually existed. Before we go any further, do me a favor. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far this story reaches. And if you've ever lost someone who mattered, hit that like button. I want to know I'm not alone in this. The albums sat on the third shelf of the bookcase in my living room. 5 leather-bound volumes, brown with gold embossing on the spines. Catherine had chosen them herself back in 1972, the year after we married. She'd saved up from her library salary to buy quality, the kind that would last. And they did last, 50 years. Each album represented a decade of our life together. Album 1 held the 70s, our courtship, our wedding, our honeymoon. Album 2 covered the 80s, when David was born and we bought this house. Album 3 was the 90s, harder years, beautiful years. Album 4 took us through the 2000s, when we became grandparents. Album 5 held everything from 2010 until Catherine's death in 2022. I looked at those albums every single day after she died. Some mornings, I'd make my coffee and sit with Album 4, looking at the photographs of Catherine holding baby Sophie for the first time, her face in those pictures, the pure joy of becoming a grandmother. It reminded me that happiness had been real, that we'd had it, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Other days, when the house felt too quiet, I'd open Album 1 and find us young again. Catherine at 23, standing in her parents' garden in that simple cream dress she'd chosen for our wedding. Me at 24, skinny and nervous and so damn lucky. The world stretched out in front of us like we had all the time there ever was. Those albums weren't dusty. I handled them too often for dust to settle. Catherine had organized everything chronologically. She'd written dates on the backs of photographs in her neat library script she used to catalog books. Sometimes she'd add little notes. Tom's terrible haircut, 1984. David's first fish, didn't want to touch it. Our 35th anniversary, still haven't killed each other. Her humor lived in those margins. After she died, those 5 albums became the center of my world. They were how I knew the past 47 years had actually happened. They were how I proved to myself, on the bad days, that I'd been loved by someone extraordinary. They were sacred, and my daughter-in-law threw them away like they were garbage cluttering up a space she wanted to redesign. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who Catherine was first. You need to know what was in those albums, because when you understand what Kristen destroyed, you'll understand why what happened next was justice, not revenge. Catherine kept every photo in chronological order, wrote dates and little notes on the backs. Each album was a decade. Each decade was a lifetime, and Kristen threw them in the garbage like junk mail. She was a librarian. That's how we met. I was a young teacher looking for books to use in my classroom, and she recommended Steinbeck. We talked for 2 hours that first day. She had this way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the world. She loved mystery novels, especially Agatha Christie. She kept a garden that produced more tomatoes than any 2 people could eat. She made pancakes every Sunday morning for 47 years. That was Catherine. Nothing flashy. Everything is real. Album 1 held our beginning. There were photographs of us at the Cedar Lake 4th of July Festival in 1970. Both of us so young we looked like different people. Our wedding pictures from 1971. Small ceremony, just family, held in her parents' backyard. Our honeymoon on Mackinac Island, where it rained 3 days straight, and we didn't care at all. Catherine, pregnant with David in 1978. standing in front of this house the week we moved in, her hand on her belly, and that smile that meant everything was going to be fine. Album 2 was the 80s. Baby David in 100 different poses. Catherine had documented everything. Our first garden, before Catherine figured out what she was doing. David's first day of school. Christmas mornings. Catherine's mother's funeral. The everyday mixed with the important, because Catherine understood they were the same thing. Album 3 covered the 90s. David's high school graduation. Our trip to Washington, D.C. Catherine's father's funeral. Just 2 years after her mother's. Harder photographs, those ones. You could see the grief in Catherine's eyes, but there were good ones too. David's college acceptance letter. Catherine holding it up like a trophy. Our 25th anniversary dinner at Mario's downtown. Ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because we were living them together. Album 4 was my favorite. The 2000s brought Sophie, our granddaughter. Catherine becoming a grandmother changed something in her, deepened her somehow. There were photographs of her teaching Sophie to read, the same patient expression she'd used with library patrons for 30 years. My retirement party in 2006, our trips to the Upper Peninsula, Catherine standing by waterfalls, her hair going gray and beautiful. The quiet years, when we finally had time. Album 5 was the hardest to look at and the most important to keep. The last years, our 40th anniversary, our 45th, Catherine in her garden, older now, but still herself. The photograph of us together at Thanksgiving 2020, 4 months before her diagnosis. We were sitting on this porch, Catherine leaning against me, both of us looking at something off camera, probably Sophie showing us something on her phone. The final pictures from 2021 during treatment. Catherine's last days in 2022, surrounded by family. We looked happy, even then. We were happy, even then. These weren't Instagram moments. These weren't staged or filtered or performed for an audience. They were real life, weathered and beautiful and true. The kind of love you build on thousands of unremarkable days that somehow add up to everything that matters. Every photograph was a piece of Catherine that hadn't died yet. Every album was proof that our 47 years together had substance and weight and meaning. And then Kristen decided they were clutter. I just didn't see it coming. Kristen walked into my home like a realtor appraising a property, not a daughter-in-law joining a family. Every time she visited, I could see her mentally erasing Catherine from the rooms. I should have seen what was coming. Let me back up. David's first wife was Emily. Sweet woman, kindergarten teacher. Loved books almost as much as Catherine did. Catherine adored her. They'd spend hours together in the garden, talking about plants and students and life. Emily fit into this family like she'd always been here. When Catherine got sick, Emily was at the hospital every day. At the funeral, Emily cried harder than anyone except me and David. I considered her a daughter. In 2020, 2 years before Catherine died, David divorced her. Midlife crisis, I suppose. There was a woman at his office. Younger, exciting, everything Emily wasn't. The divorce devastated Emily. It disappointed me more than I told David. Catherine was heartbroken by it, though she was too sick by then to say much. Early 2021, David married Kristen. She was an interior designer, 38 years old, attractive in that sharp, angular way, always dressed like she was about to be photographed, which she was, constantly, for her Instagram account. She specialized in minimalism, those sterile white rooms with one carefully placed vase, everything else stripped away. She hated my house on sight. First visit, she walked through every room with this tight smile, making little humming sounds. "It's very lived in," she said. "So much stuff. Don't you find it cluttered, Tom?" I said. "I found it comfortable." "It's dated," she said, running her finger along Catherine's china cabinet. "Like a museum. You're living in the past." David laughed nervously. "Kristen's just passionate about design, Dad. I'm passionate about helping people," Kristen corrected. She looked at me with what I'm sure she thought was sympathy. "You've been alone in this big house since Catherine passed. Don't you think it's time to simplify? Make things easier on yourself?" I said I was fine. But she didn't stop. Every visit, she'd make comments. The wallpaper in the dining room was oppressive. Catherine's garden needed to be redesigned for low maintenance. The photographs on the walls were overwhelming, too many memories competing for attention. She started talking about the house's value, $650,000, maybe more, with the lakefront property included. "That's a lot of equity just sitting here," she'd say. "You could sell this place, move into a nice assisted living facility, and David could invest the money for you. You'd be taken care of, like I was helpless." David would apologize later, when Kristen was out of earshot. "She means well, Dad. She just wants you to be comfortable." "I am comfortable," I'd say. "I know. I'll talk to her." But he never did. Or if he did, it didn't change anything. The truth was becoming clear. David had become weak. The same son I'd raised to stand up for what was right now couldn't stand up to his own wife. He'd traded a woman who loved our family for a woman who loved our assets. Kristen wasn't interested in me. She was interested in what I owned. She'd scroll through her phone during family dinners, posting photographs she'd taken of various homes. I never saw her post pictures of my house directly, but the comments she'd make suggested she found it amusing material. Have you ever watched your child marry the wrong person? Someone who changes them into someone you don't recognize? Drop your story in the comments. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who's lived through this. Kristen's campaign intensified after my 76th birthday in 2023. She started bringing me brochures for retirement communities. Beautiful places, Tom. You'd have activities, people your own age. David and I could visit all the time. Sure they would. She talked about my estate planning at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of Sophie, in front of Emily's parents, who still came to family gatherings because I invited them. "You really should think about the future, Tom. David's your only child. This house, your retirement accounts, it all needs to be organized properly." I told her my affairs were in order. "But are they optimized?" She smiled. "I have an excellent financial planner. We could set up a meeting." I said no, thank you. Her smile tightened. "You're being stubborn. David, tell your father he's being stubborn." David looked at his plate. "Dad can make his own decisions, Chris." "Fine." She stood up from the table. "But when you're stuck in this deteriorating house with no one to help you, don't come crying to us." She left early. David followed her. That's when I knew something was going to happen. I just didn't know what. The albums sat on their shelf like they had for 50 years. 5 decades of proof that love like ours existed. Kristen looked at them and saw clutter worth maybe $5 at a garage sale. I looked at them and saw everything I had left. The day she actually did it was a Tuesday in October 2023. David had called the night before. Nothing unusual, just checking in, asking about my furnace before winter arrived. He said he'd stop by Tuesday afternoon to take a look at it. I thought it was kindness. I didn't realize Kristen would be coming with him, and I certainly didn't realize what she planned to do while David was down in my basement, checking filters and thermostats, trusting his wife to behave like a decent human being upstairs. I've learned that the worst days of your life usually start out ordinary. Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, started with coffee and roses. It ended with my hands shaking so badly I couldn't dial my phone. The morning was exactly like every Tuesday morning for the past year and a half. I woke at 6:30, made coffee in the same pot Catherine and I had used since 1989. While it brewed, I stood at the mantel and looked at her photograph, the one from our 40th anniversary, her smile real and warm and aimed right at me. Some people might think that's morbid, talking to a photograph every morning, saying, "Good morning, sweetheart," to a woman who's been gone 18 months. I don't care what people think. After coffee, I read the newspaper front to back. Then I went outside to Catherine's rose garden. She'd planted it in 1982, spent 40 years perfecting it. When she died, I thought about letting it go. What did I know about roses? But then I realized letting her garden die would be like letting another piece of her disappear. So I learned, read books, watched videos, asked the folks at the garden center for advice. 18 months later, those roses still bloomed every summer, exactly the way Catherine would want them to. That Tuesday morning, I deadheaded the last of the fall blooms and checked the mulch. Winter was coming. I needed to protect the roots. At 11:30, I drove to the corner diner downtown for my weekly lunch with Martin Crawford. Martin taught mathematics at Cedar Lake High for 39 years, retired the same year I did. We'd been having Tuesday lunch together for 7 years now, talked about books, politics, our kids, the ways the world had changed and the ways it hadn't. That Tuesday, we talked about Sophie. She'd been having a rough week at school, some drama with her friends, typical teenage stuff. Martin asked if she was doing all right. "She'll be fine," I said. "She's coming over this afternoon. Need some grandpa time." "You're good with her," Martin said. "Catherine would be proud." I paid for lunch, drove home around 1:30. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Quiet, familiar, filled with 50 years of accumulated life. The albums were on their shelf where they'd always been. I checked the ingredients for Catherine's chocolate chip cookies, Sophie's favorite. I'd promised to make them for her after school. Catherine had perfected the recipe over 30 years. Slightly underbaked, extra vanilla, dark chocolate chips instead of milk chocolate. I'd watched her make them 1,000 times. After she died, I asked Sophie if she wanted the recipe. "No, Grandpa," she'd said. "I want you to make them. They taste better when you do it." So I did. Every time she visited, I'd planned to start mixing the dough around 3 o'clock. Sophie would arrive at 4:15, right after school. We'd bake together, talk about whatever was bothering her, and she'd leave with a container full of cookies and whatever wisdom I could offer. That was the plan. A normal Tuesday, routine and comfortable and predictable. I had no idea that while I was eating lunch with Martin, laughing about his grandson's Little League game, Kristen was in my home going through my belongings like she had every right to decide what stayed and what got thrown away. Kristen didn't sneak the albums out in guilt or shame. She walked through my home like she already owned it, making improvements to a house that wasn't hers, erasing a woman she'd never even met. I didn't know any of this until later, until after Sophie found them, until after I'd called David and demanded answers, until after Kristen had defended herself with the kind of logic that makes your blood pressure spike and your faith in humanity drop. But here's what happened while I was at the corner diner. David arrived at my house around noon. He'd called me the night before, mentioned he wanted to check my furnace before winter set in properly. I'd given him a key years ago, back when I trusted him to respect my home and my privacy. He let himself in, went straight to the basement, started checking filters, examining the pilot light, making sure everything would run smoothly when the real cold arrived. Kristen came with him. I didn't know that part. David hadn't mentioned it. If he had, I would have told him to come alone, but he probably knew that, which is why he didn't say anything. While David was in the basement, 20 minutes, maybe 30, Kristen was upstairs in my living room, looking around, evaluating, making decisions about things that weren't hers to decide. She told David later, and David eventually told Sophie, who told me, "I was just trying to help." The living room was so dark and depressing. All those old photos everywhere, all that furniture from the 70s. Tom needs to move forward, not stay stuck in the past. She walked around the room, looked at the photographs on the walls, pictures of Catherine at every age, pictures of our life together. Looked at Catherine's china cabinet with her mother's dishes still arranged exactly how Catherine had kept them. And then she saw the albums, 5 leather-bound volumes on the 3rd shelf of the bookcase, right where they'd sat for 50 years. According to what she told David, she thought, "These dusty old albums are just making Tom sad. He looks at them every day and can't let go. He probably won't even notice if they disappear. And if he does, he'll realize I did him a favor." She didn't take 1 or 2. She took all 5, lifted them off the shelf, albums that probably weighed 20 pounds together, filled with 50 years of photographs and Catherine's notes, carried them through my living room, through my kitchen, out to my garage, and she put them in the trash bin by the curb. All 5 albums. In the garbage, with the coffee grounds and the junk mail and the things that don't matter. The trash truck came every Wednesday morning, She knew that. David had mentioned it once when they'd visited on a Tuesday evening. She was putting the albums out Tuesday afternoon. She intended for them to be gone before I even noticed they were missing. When David came up from the basement, Kristen was back in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. "All set, Chris?" David asked. "Yep. I've been looking at Tom's bookshelf. He really should organize better. So much clutter." David glanced at the bookcase. The gap where 5 albums had been was right there on the 3rd shelf, but he didn't notice. Why would he? He hadn't looked at those albums in years, didn't know exactly where they belonged or what was missing. They left around 12:30, locked the door behind them, drove away, and I came home 90 minutes later, completely unaware that my wife's memory was sitting in a trash bin, waiting to be hauled away and buried in a landfill somewhere, gone forever. If Sophie hadn't been coming that afternoon, I never would have known until it was too late. My granddaughter stood in my kitchen, 16 years old, holding my wife's memory in her trembling hands and asking, "Grandpa, why were these in the trash?" And I had no answer, yet. Sophie arrived at 4:15, exactly when she'd said she would. She was a good kid, responsible, thoughtful, the kind of teenager who still wanted to spend time with her grandfather instead of just texting from her room. She'd inherited Catherine's eyes, that same warm brown that could make you feel understood without words. She parked in the driveway, got out of her car, the 10-year-old Honda Civic she'd bought herself with money from her summer job. Responsible, practical, not like kids these days who expect everything handed to them. She told me later what happened next. She was walking toward the porch when something caught her eye. The trash bin by the curb looked fuller than usual, and there was something leather sticking out from under a bag. Sophie walked over, lifted the lid, and there they were, 5 leather-bound photo albums, stacked in the trash like they were worthless, like they were garbage. She recognized them immediately. She'd looked through those albums dozens of times over the years, sitting with me and Catherine when she was little, listening to stories about a grandmother she was just starting to know, sitting with just me after Catherine died, asking about the woman in the photographs, wanting to remember her better. Those albums had taught Sophie who her grandmother was, and someone had thrown them away. Sophie pulled them out, all 5, her hands shaking. One of the albums, album 1, the courtship years, was damaged. A bag above it had been leaking something. Coffee, maybe, or soda. The leather was stained. Some of the pages were damp. A few loose photographs had fallen out and were scattered at the bottom of the bin. Sophie gathered everything. The albums, the loose photos, anything that belonged to Catherine. She carried them up to the porch, let herself in with the key I'd given her years ago, and she waited. I was out back, checking on the garden shed, making sure the door latch was secure before winter. I heard her car but figured she'd come find me. Instead, when I walked into the kitchen 5 minutes later, there was Sophie, standing at the counter, tears streaming down her face, holding the albums. The leather was dirty, one was stained, pages were bent. "Grandpa?" she said. Her voice cracked. "Why were these in the trash?" I stared at the albums in her hands. My brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Those albums lived on the bookcase shelf. They'd been there that morning. I'd looked at them before I left for lunch. Just a glance as I walked out. The way you look at things that give you comfort. "What do you mean, in the trash?" I asked. "In the garbage bin, by the curb. Someone threw them away." I walked to the living room, looked at the bookcase. The 3rd shelf was empty. The space where 5 albums had sat for 50 years was just empty. And that's when my hands started shaking. That's when the rage hit. The kind I hadn't felt since I watched Catherine suffer through chemo, helpless to do anything but hold her hand. Someone had been in my home. Someone had taken Catherine's memory and thrown it away like trash. "You're making this into such a drama." That's what she said about throwing away 47 years of my marriage, as if my grief was a performance, as if Catherine's existence was clutter. I called David immediately. Sophie was still standing there holding the albums, watching me with those worried eyes that looked exactly like Catherine's. David answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Were you at my house today? My voice was steady, controlled, the way it gets when I'm too angry to yell. Silence. Then, yeah, I came by around noon, checked your furnace like I said I would. Why? Was Kristen with you? Longer silence. Yeah, she was. Dad, what's going on? Did you go into my living room? Did you touch my bookcase? No, I was in the basement the whole time. Dad, you're scaring me. What happened? The photo albums are gone, David. All 5 of them. Sophie just found them in the trash bin by the curb. I heard him breathe, heard something that sounded like comprehension, followed by dread. Oh God, he said. Oh no, Dad, let me call you back. Put Kristen on the phone. Right now. Dad, let me talk to her first. Now, David. I heard muffled conversation. Kristen's voice in the background, sharp and defensive. Then she was on the line. Tom, I can explain. You went through my home. You took my wife's photo albums. You threw them in the garbage. Explain that. They were just sitting there collecting dust. You look at them every single day and it just makes you sad. I thought if they disappeared, you wouldn't even notice. You'd move on. I was trying to help you. Help me. Yes. That house is like a shrine to a dead woman. It's not healthy. David agrees. He just won't say it to your face. You have digital copies, right? You don't need the physical albums anymore. They're just clutter. They were Catherine's. She organized them. She wrote notes on every photograph. They're irreplaceable. Tom, you're making this into such a drama. They're photos. They're not Catherine. Catherine is gone. You need to accept that and move forward with your life instead of living in this depressing museum. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Sophie was crying again. Quiet tears running down her face as she listened to Kristen dismiss her grandmother's memory like it was nothing. David's voice came back on, weak, pleading. Dad, she meant well. She's just trying to help you. Can't we all just calm down and talk about this like adults? I hung up, stood there in my kitchen, looking at Sophie, looking at the damaged albums on my counter, and I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to end with an apology. This wasn't going to end with Kristen understanding what she'd done wrong. This was going to end with consequences she'd never forget. There's a difference between the anger that makes you yell and the anger that makes you plan. The first one burns out fast. The second one changes everything. I didn't yell after I hung up on David, didn't throw anything, didn't call him back to tell him what I thought of his wife or his weak defenses of her behavior. I just stood there in my kitchen, looking at the damaged albums Sophie had rescued from the garbage. Album 1's cover was stained dark brown, where coffee or soda had seeped through the trash bag. The leather was warped. When I opened it carefully, some of the pages stuck together. Catherine's notes on the backs of photographs, her neat script documenting our courtship, our wedding, our early years, were smudged in places. Still readable, but damaged, irreversibly damaged. Sophie sat at the kitchen table watching me, not saying anything, just watching. Grandpa, she finally said, what are you going to do? Good question. I could demand an apology. Kristen would give me one. Insincere, defensive, full of justifications about how she'd meant well. David would apologize too, blame himself for not watching her, promise it would never happen again. And then what? I'd forgive them, put the albums back on the shelf and pretend this hadn't revealed exactly who they were. Or I could accept what this moment had taught me. My daughter-in-law thought Catherine's memory was garbage. My son stood by and let it happen. They looked at 50 years of marriage, of love, of careful documentation and preservation, and saw clutter that needed to be thrown away. That's who they were, and I was done pretending otherwise. I'm going to make sure this never happens again, I told Sophie. She nodded, didn't ask what I meant. She was 17 years old, but she understood some things don't require explanation. I spent that evening carefully examining each album. Album 1 was the worst. Water damage, warped pages, some photographs permanently stuck to the plastic sleeves. Album 2 had a torn corner where something sharp had caught it. Album 3 through 5 were mostly intact, but they'd all been in the garbage. They smelled like it, like rot and coffee grounds and disrespect. I took photographs of every damaged page, documented everything. I didn't know yet what I'd do with the evidence, but I knew I wanted it recorded. That night, after Sophie went home, I sat in my living room with the albums spread across the coffee table, the damaged ones, the proof that someone who was supposed to be family thought my grief was something to be managed, minimized, and ultimately discarded. I thought about Catherine. She'd been a quiet woman, but she had steel in her. When something mattered, she didn't back down. She didn't compromise on principle. She didn't accept disrespect in the name of keeping peace. What would Catherine do? The answer came to me around midnight, sitting there in the dark with her albums around me like evidence at a trial. Catherine would protect what mattered. She'd make sure the people who valued nothing but money and appearances learned what it cost to disrespect love. Catherine would make them understand consequences, and so would I. The next morning, I called Rosemary Mitchell, the best estate attorney in Cedar Lake, and made an appointment. Rosemary Mitchell had been Catherine's friend for 30 years. That's the first thing you need to know about her. The second thing is that she didn't suffer fools, didn't accept excuses, and built legal documents like fortresses. She was exactly who I needed. I'd known Rosemary since the 80s, when she'd moved to Cedar Lake fresh out of law school to open her own practice. Catherine had befriended her at the library. Rosemary spent hours there researching case law before everything went digital. They'd stayed close over the decades. Rosemary had been at every major family event. She'd been a pallbearer at Catherine's funeral. She knew what Catherine had meant to me. Her office was on Main Street, in a converted Victorian that matched mine in age, if not in style. Rosemary had modernized hers. Clean lines, professional, nothing sentimental. But she'd kept Catherine's photograph on her desk, the two of them at some charity event in the 90s, both laughing at something outside the frame. I sat across from her desk on Wednesday morning, October 18th, less than 24 hours after Sophie had found the albums in the trash. Rosemary was 70 years old, sharp as ever, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses that made her look like she was perpetually examining evidence. "Tom," she said, "you sounded upset on the phone. What happened?" I told her everything. The albums, Kristen's violation, the phone call, the damaged photographs, David's weak defense. I showed her the pictures I'd taken of the damage. Rosemary listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "That woman threw away Catherine's photo albums," she said finally. Not a question. A statement of fact being entered into record. "All 5 of them," I confirmed. "And David knew she'd been in your house? He was there, in the basement. He gave her access." Rosemary's jaw tightened. She'd never liked Kristen. I'd seen it at family gatherings, the way Rosemary watched her with professional assessment. Rosemary had loved Emily, Catherine's choice for daughter-in-law. She'd been coldly polite to Kristen ever since the wedding. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to change my will." She nodded, didn't look surprised. "Tell me what you're thinking." "Everything goes to Sophie. The house, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, everything. David gets the legally required minimum. Kristen gets explicitly excluded. I want language that makes it impossible for her to inherit anything even if David predeceases me." Rosemary picked up a pen, started making notes. "That's possible," she said. "I'll draft something ironclad. But Tom, you need to understand. This is a permanent decision. Once you do this, there's no going back without looking incompetent or coerced. You need to be certain." "I'm certain. David is your only child?" "David chose his wife over his mother's memory, over me, over basic human decency. I'm not rewarding that." Rosemary looked at me over her reading glasses, measuring, assessing. Then she smiled, small and fierce. "Catherine would be proud of you," she said. "Catherine would have done the same thing," I replied. "Yes," Rosemary agreed. "She would have." She pulled out her laptop. "Let's make sure this is bulletproof," she said. "I don't want them finding any way to contest it. And Tom, I'm going to enjoy writing this one." We started that afternoon. By evening, we had a plan. The law has a beautiful clarity to it when used properly. No emotion, Just consequences written in language that can't be misunderstood or bargained away. Rosemary drafted the will over 3 days. She'd had me assessed by 2 physicians, Dr. Harrison, my primary care doctor of 20 years, and Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist Rosemary knew. Both examined me, asked questions, and evaluated my mental competence. Both signed statements confirming I was of completely sound mind, under no duress, and fully capable of making my own decisions about my estate. Rosemary had seen too many wills contested on competency grounds. She wasn't leaving any openings. The will itself was 12 pages long, precise, thorough, unambiguous. The key sections: my estate, house valued at approximately $650,000, retirement accounts totaling $280,000, life insurance policy worth $150,000, savings and investments around $120,000, would go 75% to my granddaughter, Sophie Catherine Brennan. The remaining 25% would be divided between several charities Catherine had supported: the Cedar Lake Library, the local literacy program, the Community Garden Project. David Michael Brennan, my only child, would receive $1. Kristen Ann Brennan, my daughter-in-law, was explicitly named as excluded from any inheritance under any circumstances, including but not limited to if David predeceased me, if Sophie predeceased me, or if any other circumstances arose that might otherwise allow her to claim any portion of my estate. There was a section explaining why, due to demonstrating disrespect for my late wife's memory and violation of my trust, I have chosen to exclude my son and daughter-in-law from meaningful inheritance. Rosemary had advised against including reasons. It gives them something to argue about, she'd said. I insisted. I wanted it in writing. I wanted the reason documented, part of the legal record, impossible to ignore or reframe. They won't be able to contest based on that language, Rosemary confirmed. You have the right to dispose of your property as you see fit. You're competent. You're explaining your reasoning. It's airtight. On October 24th, 2023, exactly 1 week after Kristen threw away the albums, I signed the will in Rosemary's office. She'd brought in 2 witnesses, her paralegal and another attorney from down the hall. Both signed. Rosemary notarized it. Done. Legal. Permanent. I drove home that afternoon with a copy of the will in my passenger seat. The original stayed with Rosemary, secured in her office safe, backed up digitally, registered with the court. When I got home, I put the copy in my desk drawer. Then I looked at the albums on the coffee table, still there where I'd left them, still damaged, still proof of everything that had led me to this moment. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt clear. For the first time since Catherine died, I felt like I'd done something she would have wanted me to do. Something strong, something final, something that protected what mattered. The next 2 years would test that clarity. David and Kristen didn't know yet what I'd done. They thought everything was still fine between us. They thought I'd eventually forgive and forget. They were wrong. I didn't tell David about the will. That was deliberate. I wanted to watch what happened when they thought they still had something to gain. The week after I signed the will, David called, apologetic, nervous, trying to smooth things over. Dad, about last week, Kristen feels terrible. She really thought she was helping. You know how she is, always trying to fix things, make things better. She didn't mean any harm. I let him talk, didn't argue, didn't accept the apology either. The albums are damaged, I said. Some of the photographs are ruined. I know. I'm so sorry. We'll pay to have them restored, whatever it costs. They're irreplaceable, David. Silence on his end. Then, I know, Dad. I know. I'll talk to Kristen. This won't happen again. It wouldn't happen again because I'd changed the locks, because I'd taken back the spare key during that phone call. I told David I wanted it returned. He'd sputtered, confused, hurt. You don't trust me anymore? I don't trust your judgment anymore, I'd said. There's a difference. He'd mailed the key back. No note, just the key in an envelope. But I didn't tell him about the will. Rosemary had asked if I wanted to inform him immediately, to make the consequences clear. I'd said no. I wanted to see what they did next, whether they'd change. whether David would finally stand up to Kristen, whether they'd show even a shred of genuine remorse or respect. I wanted evidence that my decision was right. Over the next 2 years, they gave me plenty. Sophie knew about the will. I'd told her that same week, sitting in my living room with the damaged album still spread out like evidence. "Grandpa, you don't have to do this because of me," she'd said. "I'm not doing it because of you," I'd told her. "I'm doing it because of them, because of who they've shown themselves to be. You're just the person who deserves what they don't." She'd cried. Not sad tears, something else. Relief, maybe. Validation that her grandmother's memory mattered, that someone was willing to protect it. "Don't tell your father," I'd said. "When the time comes, I'll tell him myself, but I need you to keep this secret." "I promise," she'd said, and she had. For 2 years, Sophie kept that promise, watching her father and Kristen make choices, knowing what those choices were costing them. I restored the albums as best I could, found a specialist in Ann Arbor who worked with archival restoration. She did remarkable work, couldn't undo all the damage, but preserved what could be saved, stabilized the rest, put them in protective sleeves, acid-free pages, and proper storage. It cost me $1,200, worth every penny. The albums went back on the shelf, same spot, third shelf of the bookcase. I looked at them every day, just like before, but now they were evidence too, proof that some things, once damaged, can't be fully repaired. That's what I was learning about my relationship with David. Some damage is permanent, and the people who cause it don't always deserve another chance to cause more. I settled in to wait, to watch, to document everything that happened next. I started keeping a journal the day after the album incident. Blue notebook, plain cover, lined pages. Every interaction with David and Kristen, I wrote it down. What happened, how it made me feel. Evidence for myself, proof I wasn't overreacting. The pattern started immediately. Canceled Sunday dinners, 3 in the first 2 months alone. Kristen always had a client meeting, a work emergency, something more important than family. My 76th birthday that November. They arrived an hour late. Kristen spent dinner on her phone, barely looking up. Left immediately after cake, claimed exhaustion. Christmas Eve, they didn't come at all. Kristen's family had a party. David apologized via text. January 2024. They didn't visit once, not once the entire month. Sophie came by on Valentine's Day, brought me flowers from Grandma, her tradition since Catherine died. David didn't even call. I watched David's car slow down in front of my house one spring afternoon while I was planting Catherine's garden. I saw him look at me through the windshield. Then he sped up and drove away without stopping. Sophie's 18th birthday in April. I hosted dinner at my house. David and Kristen arrived 2 hours late, after we'd already eaten. Kristen looked annoyed at being there. They left within 30 minutes. May 2024. That's when I really understood how little I mattered to them. I had chest pains. Anxiety, as it turned out. Stress-related. Nothing serious. But I spent 2 days in the hospital for observation. Sophie stayed with me both nights, sleeping in the chair beside my bed, brought me books, talked to the nurses, made sure I was comfortable. David visited once, 20 minutes between work meetings, asked if I was okay, looked relieved when I said yes, left before I could answer fully. Kristen didn't come at all. Through the summer, they visited twice. Both times, Kristen walked through the house making comments about updates I should consider. "This kitchen is so outdated, Tom. You really should renovate before you sell." I wasn't selling. She talked like it was inevitable. September brought another birthday dinner for Sophie at my house. David and Kristen arrived late again. Kristen spent the entire meal scrolling through her phone, posting pictures of a house she'd designed. Barely said 3 words to Sophie. Left right after dessert. October 17th, 2024. Exactly 1 year after Kristen threw away the albums. I didn't mention it. David didn't either. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement. Nothing. Then came Thanksgiving 2024. That's when it got worse. I'd invited David and Kristen for Thanksgiving dinner. Sophie was coming. Martin and his wife, Emily's parents, who I still considered family despite the divorce. David called the day before. "Dad, is it okay if we bring someone?" "Kristen's friend Marcus. He's a realtor. She thought you two should meet." "Why would I need to meet a realtor?" "Just in case. For the future. He specializes in lakefront properties." I should have said no. Should have told David that bringing a realtor to Thanksgiving dinner was insulting. Instead, I said fine. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Marcus showed up with business cards. Spent dinner talking about the Cedar Lake real estate market, how property values had jumped 15% in 2 years, how lakefront homes were selling within days of listing. "A house like this," he said, gesturing around my dining room, "fully renovated. You're looking at 800,000, maybe 9. As is, still 650, easy. The land alone is worth 300. Kristen smiled. "See, Tom? Options. For when you're ready." I wasn't ready. I'd never be ready. But I didn't argue. I just watched David avoid my eyes, watched Kristen treat my home like an investment property, watched this realtor appraise my life over turkey and stuffing, and I wrote it all down in the blue notebook that night. The weight of evidence was growing. Every entry in that notebook was another reason my decision had been right. But it was Christmas 2024 that sealed it. The moment I knew, beyond any doubt, that I'd made the right choice. Christmas had always been Catherine's favorite holiday. She'd spend weeks decorating the tree, the mantle, the porch railings wrapped in lights. She'd bake cookies for neighbors, host an open house on Christmas Eve, make the day feel magical even after David grew up and moved out. After she died, I kept up some of the traditions, smaller scale, just for Sophie and me. I still put up the tree, the same artificial one Catherine and I had bought in 1995. I still hung her ornaments, the collection she'd built over 47 years. Each one had a story. Christmas Eve 2024, I invited David and Kristen for dinner. Sophie was coming. Martin and his wife. Small group, simple meal, nothing elaborate. David called that morning. "Dad, we can't make it tonight. Kristen's family is having a big party. It's important to her. You're choosing her family over Christmas Eve with me." "It's not choosing, Dad. It's just, her parents really want us there. We'll come by tomorrow, Christmas Day. Open presents then." I said fine, hung up. Sophie came that evening. We had dinner, just the two of us. Opened presents. She'd gotten me a book I'd mentioned wanting, gardening gloves for spring. I'd gotten her a locket with Catherine's picture inside. She cried when she opened it. "Grandpa, this is perfect." We had a good night. Quiet. Peaceful. Christmas Day, David and Kristen showed up around 3 in the afternoon. No call beforehand. Just arrived. Kristen looked around the living room. At the tree, the decorations, the photographs of Catherine in Christmas sweaters from decades past. "Tom, you really go all out for this, don't you?" She said it like it was quaint. Excessive. "Catherine loved Christmas," I said. "Right. Well," she handed me a wrapped box. "We got you something." I opened it. A gift card to a home improvement store. $100. "For when you're ready to update things," Kristen said brightly. "Start small, you know? New paint maybe." David gave me a book, one I already owned. I'd given it to him 3 years ago. Recommended it because I thought he'd like it. Either he'd never read it or didn't remember where it came from. They stayed 40 minutes. Kristen checked her phone constantly. David looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. As they were leaving, Kristen paused at the door. "Oh, Tom, I meant to ask, have you thought more about estate planning? We really should sit down with that financial planner I mentioned." "My estate is planned," I said. "But is it optimized?" "You're 78 now." 78, I corrected. She waved her hand. "Whatever. The point is, you're not getting younger. David should be involved in these decisions. He's your only heir." Only heir. She said it with such certainty, such an assumption. "Everything's handled," I told her. "Tom, you're being stubborn again. This is important. Your estate, your legacy, is handled," I repeated. "You don't need to worry about it." She looked at David. "Talk to him." David looked at his shoes. "Dad knows what he's doing, Chris." They left. I stood in my living room, surrounded by Catherine's decorations, holding a gift card chosen to help me erase her from my own house. That night, I added one more entry to the blue notebook. December 25th, 2024. Kristen called herself and David my only heirs. Still talking about my estate like it's already theirs. Still pushing me to erase Catherine. They have no idea what's coming. I was ready for them to find out. I've taught English for 40 years. I know how to structure a story for maximum impact. Evidence first, context second, revelation third, consequences last. The day after Thanksgiving 2025, I called David. It was Friday morning. I'd been awake since 5, drinking coffee, looking at the repaired albums on my dining room table. Still damaged. You could still see the water stains on album 1, the bent corners on album 2, but preserved, protected, safe. I picked up the phone at 9 o'clock and dialed my son. Dad, he sounded surprised. We hadn't spoken since he'd left my house the day before, after the Thanksgiving dinner with the realtor. David, I need you and Kristen to come to my house tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Rosemary will be here. This is about my estate. It's not optional. What? Dad, what's going on? Can't we just... I hung up. My hand was steady. My heart rate was normal. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in 2 years. That night, I prepared. I set the damaged photo albums out on the dining room table, all 5 of them, arranged in chronological order. Album 1, with its water-stained cover in the front. Album 2, with the bent pages beside it. All the visible evidence of what Kristen had tried to destroy. I printed copies of my journal entries. Every visit where they'd disappointed me. Every missed birthday. Every forgotten promise. Every cruel comment. 2 years of documentation, dated and detailed. The entries sat in a neat stack beside the albums. I placed the new will in a manila folder. Clean, official, unambiguous. When David and Kristen arrived the next day, 15 minutes late naturally, I was sitting at the dining room table. Rosemary sat beside me in her navy suit, reading glasses on, legal pad in front of her. Official witness, legal authority, moral support. Kristen walked in looking annoyed. Tom, what's this about? We had plans this afternoon. David said something about your estate? You're not sick, are you? Her tone suggested she was hoping I wasn't. Sit down, I said. David looked nervous. Kristen looked irritated. They sat across from me at the table where we'd shared dozens of family dinners, where Catherine had served Sunday pancakes, where 2 days ago a realtor had appraised my life over Thanksgiving turkey. Rosemary nodded at me. Professional, calm, and I began the lesson I'd been preparing for 2 years. I'd structured this carefully. Opening statement establishing facts, evidence presented chronologically, building to revelation, ending with consequences that couldn't be appealed or negotiated. They thought they were here for a conversation about estate planning. They were here for a verdict. I looked at my son, at the woman who'd thrown my wife's memory in the garbage, at their faces, still clueless about what was coming, and I started speaking. David's hands shook as he read. Kristen's face went from confusion to shock to rage in about 5 seconds, and I felt absolutely nothing but relief. 2 years ago, I began, my voice calm and measured. You threw away Catherine's photo albums. I gestured to the 5 damaged albums on the table in front of them. Kristen's mouth opened. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. She closed her mouth. Her jaw tightened. October 17th, 2023. While I was having lunch with Martin Crawford, you entered my home using David's key. You went through my living room. You removed 5 irreplaceable photo albums from my bookcase, albums my wife had carefully maintained for 50 years, and you placed them in my trash bin, intending for them to be hauled away and destroyed before I even noticed they were missing. I picked up the first journal entry. These albums contained 5 decades of photographs. Many had handwritten notes from Catherine on the backs. They documented our courtship, our marriage, our son's childhood, our granddaughter's birth. They were the most precious possessions I owned. Kristen tried again. Tom, I explained this. I was trying to help. You weren't finished listening, Rosemary said quietly. Kristen glared at her, but stayed silent. I continued, reading from my journal entries, one after another, each missed birthday, each canceled visit, each dismissive comment. The hospital stay in May 2024, where Sophie slept in a chair both nights, and David visited once for 20 minutes. The Christmas gift card meant to help me erase Catherine from my own home. The realtor at Thanksgiving dinner. 2 years of evidence, documented and dated. David's face went paler with each entry. Kristen's expression shifted from defensive to calculating. Finally, I picked up the manila folder. This is my last will and testament, executed on October 24th, 2023, exactly 1 week after you threw away the albums. Rosemary witnessed it. 2 physicians assessed my mental competence and found me completely sound. Read page 3, section 4. I slid the folder across the table to David. His hands trembled as he opened it. Found the page. I started reading. The color drained from his face. Kristen grabbed the folder from him, scanned the text, and screamed. $1? Her voice was shrill, disbelieving. You're leaving us $1? And everything else goes to Sophie? David just stared at the words on the page. Silent. Broken. The house, Kristen read, her voice rising with each item. The retirement accounts, the investments, your life insurance, everything. Over $1 million. To a 19-year-old girl. To my granddaughter, I corrected, who values what matters, who rescued those albums from the trash, who stayed with me in the hospital, who shows up, who cares. David finally spoke, his voice cracked. Dad, please. I looked at my son, felt nothing but sadness for what he'd become. You're also named specifically, I told Kristen. Section 7. You are explicitly excluded from ever receiving any portion of my estate, under any circumstances, even if David predeceases me. Rosemary made sure that it was ironclad. Rosemary nodded. It is. Kristen's hands were shaking now. Her face was red with rage she was barely controlling. Is this because of photo albums? She said. You're disinheriting your only son because I threw away some old pictures? No, I said. I'm disinheriting him because for 2 years, he chose you over his mother's memory, over me, over basic decency. The albums were just the beginning. Everything that came after. That's what this is about. I stood up. You had 2 years to prove me wrong. You proved me right instead. Kristen called Catherine's memory stupid old photographs in my own home, while trying to guilt me into giving her my money. That's who she always was. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise. She exploded. This is insane. We're contesting this. Sophie manipulated you, turned you against your own son. No court will let this stand. Rosemary's voice cut through the room like a blade. Mrs. Brennan, you are specifically named in this document as excluded. The will is uncontestable. I have written assessments from 2 independent physicians confirming Mr. Brennan's complete mental competence. I have documented evidence of the incidents he described. If you attempt to contest, you'll spend tens of thousands in legal fees and lose. I'll make certain of it. Kristen turned to David. Desperate now. Vicious. Do something. We're losing almost $1 million. This is your fault. You said he'd leave everything to you. You said we just had to wait. We're losing everything because you couldn't control your father. Because of some stupid old photographs. There it was. Catherine's memory. 47 years of marriage. 5 albums of irreplaceable moments. Stupid old photographs. In my own home. While she begged for my money. David was crying now. Actual tears running down his face. Dad, he said, his voice breaking. Please, I'm sorry about the albums. I'm sorry about everything. We can fix this. I'll talk to Kristen. We'll do better. We'll visit more. For 2 years, I interrupted. I gave you chances. Every birthday you forgot. Every visit you canceled. Every time you sided with her over your mother's memory. Every time you stood by while she disrespected me in my own home. I gave you chances to choose differently. I stood up. You chose her over Catherine. Over me. Over what's right. The will stands. Kristen grabbed her purse, headed for the door, her face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, she screamed. When you're dying alone in this horrible house with no one who cares, you'll regret this. Rosemary stood. That's harassment, Mrs. Brennan. I'm noting the time and date. Leave now. They left. Kristen screamed, David sobbing. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. You're not welcome here anymore. All future communications go through Rosemary. If you need to discuss anything related to my estate, my health, or my affairs, you speak to my attorney, not to me. And I sat back down at my dining room table, surrounded by Catherine's albums, and felt peace for the first time in 2 years. 3 attorneys told them the same thing. You're getting $1 each, and there's nothing you can do about it. Kristen is learning an expensive lesson about respect. David is learning about choices. That confrontation happened 3 weeks ago, late November 2025. I know what happened afterward, because Sophie told me. She still talks to her father. That's her decision, and I don't interfere. She's 19 years old now, capable of making her own choices about relationships. David and Kristen consulted 3 different attorneys in the week after they left my house. Estate lawyers, apparently good ones. Every single attorney told them the exact same thing. The will is legally perfect, properly witnessed, completely uncontestable. I was assessed by 2 independent physicians who confirmed my mental competence. The documentation is thorough. The language is clear. They're getting $1 each, and there's nothing they can do about it. Sophie says Kristen has been pressuring David constantly. You need to make things right with your father, apologize, grovel, whatever it takes. We can't lose over $1 million over some stupid fight. But David apparently knows it's futile. He understands, finally, that some decisions can't be undone. Their marriage is strained. Sophie says they're fighting more. About money, mostly. Turns out Kristen had been planning their future based on inheriting my house, my retirement accounts, everything. She'd already picked out the lakefront property they'd buy with the proceeds from selling my home, already designed their dream house in her mind. None of that's happening now. David sent me a letter 2 weeks ago, long, handwritten, full of apologies and explanations and promises to do better. He understands now how wrong Kristen was. He sees everything clearly. If I'd just reconsider, give him one more chance, he'd prove himself. I didn't respond. Kristen sent me texts, angry ones at first, accusing me of being manipulated by Sophie, of being a bitter old man who couldn't accept that Catherine was gone, then pleading ones. She was sorry. She'd misunderstood. She'd replaced the album somehow. Anything to fix this. I blocked her number. Sophie reports that Kristen is now looking at smaller houses, modest ones, the kind you buy when you're not inheriting $750,000. She's furious about it, complains constantly about losing her dream home because of David's failure to manage his father. I had my locks changed, all of them. David's old key doesn't work anymore. I updated all my financial documents, beneficiaries on retirement accounts, life insurance policies, everything. Sophie's name is on all of them now. I named Sophie as my medical power of attorney. If something happens to me, if I can't make my own decisions, she's the one who decides, not David, not Kristen, Sophie. Rosemary handled all the paperwork. She's been remarkable through this entire process. Professional, thorough, completely on my side, and I feel lighter than I have in 2 years. Not happy, exactly. There's grief in this. Grief for the relationship I thought I had with my son. Grief for the family I thought we'd be after Catherine died. But there's peace too. The peace that comes from knowing Catherine's memory is protected. That the house she loved won't be sold and demolished for lakefront property. That her albums, her garden, her legacy will go to someone who values them. That's worth more than any relationship built on pretending disrespect doesn't matter. My son wanted to sell this house and erase Catherine's memory. My granddaughter wants to preserve it and carry her forward. That tells you everything about who deserves what. Sophie comes home most weekends now. She's 19, first year at University of Michigan studying library science, Catherine's profession. When Sophie told me her major last spring, I cried. First time I'd cried since Catherine's funeral. She didn't choose it because of the inheritance. She chose it months before I changed my will. She chose it because she'd grown up hearing stories about her grandmother helping people find books, organizing information, making knowledge accessible. She chose it because she wanted to be like Catherine. Every other Saturday, Sophie drives the 90 minutes from Ann Arbor to Cedar Lake. She arrives around noon, stays until Sunday evening. We cook together. Catherine's recipes, the ones Sophie grew up eating, the chocolate chip cookies, the Sunday pancakes, the pot roast. Catherine made every October when the weather turned cold. We work in the garden together. Sophie is learning which roses need more sun, which ones prefer shade, how to prepare them for winter. She asks questions, takes notes on her phone, treats Catherine's garden like the inheritance it is. She brings friends sometimes, college kids who are fascinated by what they call the old house full of stories. They sit in my living room, looking at the photo albums, now in protective archival sleeves, safely preserved. I tell them about Catherine, about 47 years of marriage, about what it means to build a life with someone. They listen, actually listen. One of Sophie's friends, a young man named Marcus, studying history, asked if he could photograph some of the albums for a project on material memory in the digital age. I said yes. He spent 3 hours carefully documenting pages, taking notes on Catherine's handwriting, asking about the context of different photos. "This is incredible, Mr. Brennan," he said. "This is how people used to preserve their lives. My generation just has Instagram posts that'll disappear when the servers shut down. These kids understand what Kristen never could, that some things matter more than clean lines and open floor plans." Last weekend, Sophie and I were working in the garden, planting bulbs for spring. She stopped, looked at the house, and said something that made my chest tight. "Grandpa, when I graduate, if you're okay with it, I'd like to live here for a while. Keep the house in the family, maintain Grandma's garden. I don't want this place sold and torn down." I had to turn away so she wouldn't see my face. "I'd like that," I managed to say. "Your grandmother would like that too." David wanted to erase Catherine to build his future with Kristen. Sophie wants to preserve Catherine while building her own future. That's the difference between someone who deserves an inheritance and someone who just wants money. That's why my will says what it says, and I have absolutely no regrets. I'm not telling you this story because I'm dying. I'm telling you because I'm living, and I'm living with the peace that comes from protecting what I love. That's what Catherine would want. That's what I want for you. I'm 78 years old. I'm healthy. My doctor says I've got good years ahead of me if I keep taking my walks, eating right, staying active. I plan to be around to see Sophie graduate, maybe see her marry someday, maybe meet great-grandchildren. But I have peace now, peace knowing that when I do die, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, whenever that day comes, Catherine's legacy is protected. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about respect, boundaries, protecting what matters. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, let me give you some advice from a man who's lived through it. Document behavior patterns. I kept that blue notebook for 2 years. When the time came, I had evidence, not just feelings, but facts, dates, details, patterns that couldn't be denied. Trust your instincts about people. I knew Kristen was wrong for my family from the day I met her. I ignored that instinct because I wanted to support David. That was a mistake. Your gut is usually right. Don't let anyone guilt you about your grief, how long you mourn, how you honor your memories, what possessions you keep. That's your business, nobody else's. If someone tells you to move on or let go, they're telling you their comfort matters more than your feelings. It doesn't. Make your values clear in your estate planning. Your will is your final statement about what mattered to you. Use it. Reward the people who showed up, who respected you, who valued what you valued. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Don't wait until you're gone to set boundaries. I changed my will while I was alive to see its effects. I got to watch Kristen learn that disrespect has consequences. That was worth more than any apology she might have offered at my funeral. Your memories matter. Your grief matters. Your legacy matters. Protect them. I'm living in this house that Catherine and I bought in 1975. I'm tending her garden. I'm teaching our granddaughter about the woman she came from. I'm watching Sophie become someone Catherine would be proud of. And every morning, I stand at the mantel, look at Catherine's photograph, and say, "Good morning, sweetheart." That's not being stuck in the past. That's honoring what was real. What legacy are you protecting? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories matter. Your stories matter. Thank you for listening to mine.